human-centered design. Today, we're talking about human-centered design as part of Entrepreneurship Week. This is day 2 of our mini-series, and I just realized my camera's not on, so let me show my face. Hello, people. So this is Technical Tuesday, right? And what we want to do today is kind of strike that balance between being fully technical minded and then also taking into account the people that our inventions and our technology impact. And that's where human-centered design comes in. Yesterday, if you weren't here yesterday per se, but we have another session that touches on just getting your idea launched, right? How do you start? What is the process for you to like do the first thing? What is the first step? This is not the first step. This is once you're in it and you're prototyping and you're in the midst of the work that you're doing, you might realize that you're not getting the kind of feedback that you want, or you don't know what to do with feedback. This is also for seasoned professionals that are in product development who are seeing that disconnect. Like, you know, we produce things, widget solutions, but it's not quite solving the problem. How do I bring this to my job? Or how do I cultivate innovation in a way that centers around the people that are going to consume these solutions? However, although it's a more advanced topic, if you start a business with a human-centered approach, you're going to be more successful. And you'll see why as we go through our talk today. So although human-centered design is not entrepreneurship per se, it is an integral part of new product introductions, product development, product market fit, which is something we talked about in that first session. So definitely think of it as the way or the methodology for developing ideas that are successful, not just in the marketplace, but with humans, which is the marketplace, right? So let's go through, let's get started. The design thinking framework is composed of these 3. Design thinking, which is not completely human-centered design. Human-centered design is how we look at desirability in design thinking, if that makes sense. So I'll explain that a little bit further. Let's focus on design thinking, and then we'll talk about human-centered design. In design thinking, we have 3 pillars or 3 areas that we look at when we're thinking of solving human problems or the problems that impact humans. And that is desirability. What do people want? Viability. Can this solution survive in the marketplace? And then feasibility is more along the lines of how do you make this? How do you, whether it's a gadget or a service, it's about the actual solution, how the materials, the process, and all of that. So desirability, which is understanding what people want, that's human-centered design. That is the part that brings this all together, because something can be feasible, but people might not want it. Something can be feasible, people want it, but the business model that you would have to create around this product wouldn't sustain that business, you know, or that initiative, that venture long enough to be profitable or whatnot. So all 3 pieces need to be in place. You can have a solution, which engineers do a lot. You fall in love with a solution, and now you have to go find the problem that you can apply that solution to, right? We don't want to do that, because then that's a solution in search of a problem, and you end up kind of force-fitting things. But that's what happens when you have feasibility, you have viability, but no desirability. Nobody really wants this thing, okay? So I want to pause here, and I want us to talk about these 3 components, and you can wear your engineering hat, right? You can wear your maker, your scientist hat. And what are some initial reactions? Because we're going to dive deeper into these, but I want to kind of get an idea of what comes up for you as you see these three pillars of design thinking. Okay, not right now. Got it. We'll come back to more conversations. So the 7 principles of human-centered design, and these are not my principles, these are the principles of human-centered design. They are: get past your own great idea. I love that one, because it's not just get past your idea, it's get past your own great idea. It's the idea that you think is perfect. That's the one you have to get past. Don't be restricted by your own knowledge. As people who know a lot, we spend a lot of time studying and learning and researching. And as people who bring a lot to the table, we sometimes don't realize the shortcomings of our expertise. There's an expression in Spanish, something to the extent of like, if you're a hammer, nails fall from the sky, right? Or everything looks like a nail, because that's what you know how to do. You know how to nail, hammer nails. And so there is a way in which our expertise sometimes can be the hindrance that prevents us from finding more creative solutions. We can overcomplicate solutions at times because of the depth of our skill and knowledge in silos or in very specialized fields. So you have to spend time with real people in real environments. And I can't stress that one enough. Real people, real environments. So think of like animals in the wild in their natural habitat. That's how you want your humans. You want them in their natural habitat, doing the things they do, so that you can learn from their real life experiences. Identify other users, right? So as you are experimenting, observing, interacting with real people in real environments, identify who are those secondary users, figure out who are the decision makers, because sometimes the end user is not the decision maker. Consider all the pieces that impact the product or solution use. Follow your user's lead and needs. It is so easy, again, for us as subject matter experts to show up to the room and say, this is what you need, instead of listening and knowing, not just an exercise for the sake of your product, but to know truly that they know what they need, right? And trusting that they know what they need. And then you want to think about the whole journey of the product, from inception through manufacturing. Again, and we're thinking widgets and gadgets, but at the end of the day, you have to think of the life cycle. Where does that product start? Supply chain, raw materials, the whole thing, delivery, distribution, like so many steps that go and from turning that raw material into a finished good and then put it into the hands of that user. So you want to think about all of that. And then you need to prototype and test your idea. We talked about prototyping yesterday. We will talk about prototyping in a different way today. Again, thinking more of the technicality of prototyping and then getting feedback and things of that sort. So let's get started with human-centered design. These are the 5 steps in this framework: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And empathizing is number 1. Empathizing is a very, it's a soft skill that we have to perfect in order to create products that people really want. And so we're going to talk about empathizing in a few minutes. Starting now, let's talk about when we use human-centered design. And basically, we use human-centered design to solve human problems, okay? There are 3 kinds of problems in the world. We have well-structured problems, ill-structured problems, and wicked problems. Let me give you a brief rundown of what these are. Well-structured problems, those are our favorite. We like those, especially as engineers. We can test our solution. We can identify the problem, the goal, the interim states. You can recreate the problem in a controlled environment so that you can really pick apart which pieces need to be studied further. Think of it like manufacturing environments or areas, it could be a hospital, or where the context is discrete steps and components so that you can isolate pieces and be able to determine and do your troubleshooting diagnostics, all of that, right? So you can identify solution steps, you know where to intervene, where to, when, where, who, like you can control all of those pieces. We can identify domain knowledge. You know that this is psychiatry, or this needs to be a civil engineer that does that thing, right? So it's a specific skill set that is needed to address the issue. You can solve the problem while obeying laws of nature. And that means basically that we want to call it common sense sometimes, but that's not a thing. It's not common. We're looking at problems that don't defy the laws of nature that we can observe, right? So you're not dealing with like gravitational pull in outer space. You're not dealing with, I don't know, you see where I'm going. Like it's not something that is defying that which is observable, which we can collect data from. And then we can solve the problem with practical levels of effort. It doesn't require supernatural or outrageous amounts of resources and time and whatever in order for us to be able to solve that problem. This is from Herb Simon, 1973. He did a lot of research on problem solving, and these were his findings. And so you can do some research on him as well and get more in depth if you would like to. Ill-structured problems, still in a somewhat controlled environment, but it's not easy for us to test the solution. Maybe we can test the solution, but we don't fully understand domain knowledge. We don't, like, it's interdisciplinary at this point. It's like it touches on these different things. We might be able to solve the problem while obeying laws of nature, but it takes a lot of effort to fix the thing or to create the tool. When you think of like space travel, that to me is ill-structured, but we know how to do it. It just takes a lot of resources in order to make it happen. And it does take an interdisciplinary approach. And that is a more complex undertaking. Wicked problems, however, have no definitive formulation, no criteria that determines the problem is now solved. Solutions to the wicked problems can either be good or bad, but you don't have anything in between. It's not as easy or clear to determine that, because you don't know when the problem has been solved. It's really hard to figure out what the steps are, or what the root cause of the problem is that leads you to a problem that has more than one explanation. And every wicked problem is usually a symptom of another problem. These are your typical like world peace, world hunger, corruption, right? These problems that don't seem to exist by themselves. They seem to be part of the human condition in some cases. And so trying to solve those problems causes us as humans to struggle sometimes even with our own humanity. There's no solution that has a definitive test that you can use to say, okay, we solved for homelessness, right? So what is homeless? Does it mean that they live in a house instead of in the street? Well, You buy them a house, they live in the house, but then they go back to the street. So they're buying the house, solve the problem. They have a home, but they're still homeless because they're choosing, right? So it's that kind of thing, like when you can't really define it, when you can't fix it with just 2-3 variables being controlled, those are the wicked problems. And how do we solve problems as engineers, right? These are the kinds of problems that we want to get out there. When you think United Nations and we think about the problems, the big problems that ail the world, and the contributions that we can make as technologists, scientists, and whatnot, how are we going to approach them? And that's what this methodology is for, because these are verbs, right? These are not conceptual, they're actual verbs. These are actions that you can take to move you closer to finding these solutions. And again, we start with empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And I really want to pause here and talk about the ability to understand. Okay, ability to understand is a cognitive skill. People think of empathy as a feeling, and it's not a feeling, it's actually a thought. Okay, so empathy, unlike sympathy, empathy is a cognitive practice that allows you to imagine what it's like to be in the experience of another. It is not that you feel what they feel, right? It's not like, I don't know, she lost her puppy, I lost a puppy, and I remember, I can tap into my own feeling and I can re-experience my own feeling of grief or loss or whatever. You can do that when you're practicing empathy, but empathy and sympathy are two distinct experiences. One is more of a feeling, the other one is more of a thought, okay? So this addresses the 3 principles, and probably others, but these 3 principles of spend time with real people in real environments, identify other users and follow their lead. This is where you are practicing empathy. This is you meeting them where they are, learning from their experience, instead of wanting to transport them to your lab, right? To your context, you are going to put yourself in their shoes. It's an exercise, and you're going to experience what they experience. And from that context, you are going to design. Okay, so that's empathy. And this is really important if we're going to do human-centered design, because this is where we do the research. This is how you collect your data. This is how you learn what your solution should look like. So I want to pause here and once again, see if there are thoughts, reactions to what we're learning so far. Maybe you know this stuff already and you're just here to kind of expand. So any questions, thoughts?
As a reminder, you can also put them in the chat if you'd like, if you'd rather do that. So that's available to you too.
Okay, we will keep going. I assume you understand empathy and that everything else now will be a breeze because you know this part. Now, after you are in empathy mode, well, that's the first thing. You're in empathy mode. It's a way of addressing people, of interacting with others. Now, on that foundation, you can do the other steps. It is not something that you do and then you stop doing, right? It's not like, okay, empathize, check, move on to defining the problem. No. It's empathy as a foundation, and you define the problem through empathy. Because the problem definition actually has to do with verbalizing and defining the problem from the user perspective. Okay, so problem definition is the making sense or synthesizing of the data that you've collected so far. The problem has to be stated in a human-centered way. So what does that mean? If you're familiar with Scrum methodology, I happen to do Scrum, and so I am familiar with user stories. And it is a very plain English way of describing what the user needs in order to solve their problem. And it could be multi-parts, right? It could be that, for example, when you think of a car, well, there's the driver, right? That's one user. There's the passenger in the front seat. That's another user. And then there's users in the back seat, right? So you could describe a requirement using this language so that you can identify the unique experience of each person in that vehicle. Okay, so instead of saying people want cars that are fast, right? You could say, as a man in his 20s, I want XYZ so that I can impress the ladies, right? So there's a very specific individual with a very specific need from that solution. If it's a mom of 4, right, she's going to be saying, as a mother of 4 or as a father of 4, I want a vehicle that blah, 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 so that I can blah, 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 blah. Okay, so this is a suggested format. I'm not saying it's the only one, but it's one that I have found to be very useful because people can relate to it very easily. They don't have to be a scientist or nothing to describe the expected experience they want to have when they interact with your solution. So just for you to practice this a little bit, I'm going to give you like 5 minutes. I want you to correct this sentence and make it a human-centered problem statement. Use creative license, have fun with this. It's the stupidest statement I could think of. And so just make it fun. But how would you turn, we build the best portable sanitary stations that use the most beautiful marble, yet are lightweight and easy to carry, into a human-centered problem statement? So you can just take 5 minutes to think about it, write it, play with it, and I will hopefully get some feedback from y'all and you can share. I am on camera, dear sister. Okay. My sister's visiting.
Hello, Francesca's sister.
Her name is Amber.
Hola, Amber.
She's saying hi. Do you all really need 5 minutes, or is someone ready to share? Come on, people.
We have one submission in the chat.
Yay! All right, let's read it. As a contractor, I need a more lightweight and portable sanitary station for my work sites. That's great. It's just missing one part, which is so that what? What are you trying to solve with that? But that's great, Jennifer, thank you. And see how she's thinking about this as a contractor, right? So who else might be the user of these stations? And I mean, these contractors are living the life with some marble toilets out there. All right, well, we got the one, and that will do. You kind of get the idea of what it's like to construct a problem statement from the user perspective. Oh, now my cat has something to say. So let's talk then about what empathy does and why it's important. Empathy actually leads to insight, okay? Data by itself, if you think of a spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers, right? That's just data. It's not even information. Information is when you start seeing patterns, you see it in a chart, you see a distribution of this data on, a graph or whatever. And then you have knowledge. At that point, when you look at those charts, you can infer different things and you start getting knowledge. Now, wisdom and insight have a lot to do with meaningful understanding. It's knowing what to do with the information you have, and is being able to extrapolate from that and draw conclusions that tell you how to move forward. So this is why engineers have to take statistics, and they have to look at design of experiments, and they have to learn all these different skills, because when you are out there doing things in life, then you need to transform raw data into something useful that leads in the discussion, right? You want to be data driven. That's what it means. And we are going to spend a little bit of time here because the money, the success, the world-changing invention happens here. It's in your ability to infer and gain insights from data. If you are unable to convert, it's like kinetic energy versus potential energy, right? Like, unless you're able to make that conversion in a way that's meaningful, you're gonna fall flat on your face, and your research is not gonna result, and I'm calling it research, but it's really your prototyping, right? Is not gonna result in the kind of success that you wanna see in the marketplace. And that's when we think entrepreneurship, right? So if you're designing some new something and you want to solve a problem for a lot of people, and you want to make $1 from a lot of people, right? That's the concept of business development. Then this here is where the wealth is, okay? So synthesis of data is inference-based process for making meaning of data. And insight is what happens at the end. As I explained it, it's a meaningful understanding of your user's experience. Hello, Franco, say hi to all your friends all over the world. So a meaningful understanding of your user's experience in a specific design context. So for example, we're back to the contractor that Jennifer was referring to with the portable sanitary stations, right? We have insight into the contractor when it comes to their portable sanitary stations. I don't know that contractor at home as a father, right? So I am limited to the context in which this solution exists. I am not able to extrapolate this data and then say, because in the field they need marble toilets that don't break, they will also want marble toilets at home, right? I can't do that because it's not context specific. So it is a working theory, this insight, it's a working theory, but you can still be proven wrong, because as you learn more, you might find new information and new insights into what your user actually needs or wants. I think I see more messages in the chat.
We had one more contribution.
Yes,
there it is.
exactly, Alejandra, thank you. That was, yeah, exactly. As a party organizer, I need a portable sanitary unit that is lightweight and easy to carry, yet beautiful. Perfect. Yeah. And I want to know, so that what, right? And I would finish that maybe with something like, so that my clients experience an upscale moment, even when they are in, in their bathroom, whatever, something like that. And that's assuming that marble is beautiful. Yeah, I would disagree, but that's okay. But right, so you see how all the little pieces now have to fall into place for these statements to make sense and for you to gather the kind of insight that you need from it. All right, so let's keep going. As long as my computer cooperates. All right, so let's talk about inference and inference-based learning. We're going to talk about the reasoning and how we extrapolate or how we make sense of information. Okay, there's deductive reasoning, you guys have probably heard that, inductive reasoning, and there's abductive reasoning. So 3 different thought process or ways of making sense of data that's in front of us. Deductive reasoning is the formation of a conclusion based on generally accepted statements or facts. And so this starts with a big premise at the top that must be true for anything that falls under it to also be true. Okay, so these are like overarching truths that don't change. Like humans have 2 eyes. Well, what if a human is born with only 1 eye, right? Like now something else has to define being human, because what if you don't have 2 eyes, but you're still a human? See where I'm going with it? Like, if these absolute truths are at the very top, and anything that comes under it is true by default because of that premise. So if I say something like only planets are round, we know that's not true, right? The Earth is round, the Earth is a planet. Well, here the logic or the reasoning is faulty, because stars can be round, meteorites can be round, moons can be round, right? There are other heavenly bodies. Baseballs are round and baseballs are not planets, right? So the overarching truth is not true, therefore other things are false under it. Now, if the premise was true, it would be impossible for a baseball to not be a planet. Okay, now inductive reasoning, a method of reasoning involving an element of probability. Okay, it starts with a generalization based on what you can observe. So back to like those laws of nature that we can use to create theories about what's happening here. It is the basis for the scientific method. This is where we control variables. This is where we isolate variables so that we can test how this one thing reacts to whatever we're presenting to it over time. And so the more times you do an experiment, then you can start seeing that probability emerging, right? So like when you flip the coin, right? And we know that there's a 50-50 chance that you're gonna get either heads or tails. And the more you flip the coin, the more you see that that 50% probability stands true. You might get, however, 5 heads in a row, and it looks like it's always giving you heads, right? But if you keep doing it long enough, you will see that distribution again, and it'll be 50% or so. So the inductive process, which is the scientific method, what it gives you is a likelihood of something being true with a big T, true forever, right? So the Earth is round, moons, stars, and planets are round. The Earth has a high probability of at least 33% of being a planet, because it could also be a star. It could also be a moon, right? And it has equal chance of being all three. These statements are not scientifically provable. I'm just using them to kind of make the case. And then we get to abductive reasoning. It's a method of reasoning based on a major and a minor premise. And if the minor premise is probable, then the conclusion, or that third level, can only also be probable. What does that mean? It means that it is something that can be true in an instance, but you don't know, or in a context, but if you change variables, it might no longer be true. So, for example, when we're talking about homelessness, right? And these wicked problems that are so difficult, these global problems, right? Well, solving homelessness in a neighborhood of Santo Domingo in Dominican Republic does not mean that if I take that same solution and apply it to a neighborhood of Tampa, Florida in the United States, that it will work here. Even if it's successfully eradicated homelessness over there, it might flop here altogether, because the premises under which that solution was created was very specific to that environment and to that context. Okay, so it is an opportunity for us to extrapolate from the bottom up. Deductive reasoning starts from up, and then you kind of work your way down and say, okay, if this is true, then anything that fits under here must be true. In abductive reasoning, you're saying, well, it's true here in a micro level, but I don't know if it's true above that. Why is this important? Why is understanding these different forms of reasoning important for us when making sense of what we experience through empathy? Talk to me like scientists now.
So we were talking about empathy as getting to kind of hear and understand where people are coming from. In this case, probably our potential clients, our potential audience, and perhaps understanding what their views are on the acceptance of a solution or the acceptance of a product. Where, for example, you were saying, maybe this works in another country, maybe this will not work here. Mm-hmm. Or these are my cultural or customs, whereas if you take them somewhere else, they're not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. More thoughts. I'll keep moving and we can always come back. Tell me, who should frame the reasoning statement or the problem statement? You can type it in the chat. You can sign language it. Tough crowd tonight.
Maybe the
So-
potential client?
Yes, the potential client. That is the only person that can frame the problem. And I want to talk to you guys about that because it's easy for us to solve the wrong problem very well. Okay, it's very easy for us to miss the importance of that problem statement in the direction of your whole solution design. If how you construct the problem has to do with that reasoning, right, that we've described, and if somehow your process, your reasoning logic is faulty, you're gonna end up in Siberia when you were supposed to be in Mexico, right? Your compass is off. So it is that user that has to write that problem statement. You can be present, facilitate, you can experience, you can give them words, but you can't put words in their mouth. You can't listen even actively and then go off to the lab and do the thing over there. It just doesn't work that way. And I want to switch the tables around. And I want you to think about, for example, as a female, it is very frustrating going to, for example, I'm trying to think of like all the ways that it's been frustrating to be the client, right? The consumer of products for women created by men. Because I'm like, this just, I could tell a guy did this thing because I would have never in my life think of using this in that way, right? Or the fact that there isn't a lot of research into common ailments that women experience throughout their lifetime. Perimenopause, here we go, right? So when you are the recipient of faulty solutions, it's very evident, right? But we don't always notice it when we are inflicting that on others. And I want to pause here and talk about something that is very dear to my heart, which is our social responsibility. And it's easy to see ourselves in the context of the United States and this particular country and this experience and see how we are underserved and underrepresented and all of that. You know, there is truth to all of that, and I'm not here to argue any of it. I want us to, for a moment, think about ourselves in a global setting and think of the fact that the global South, so anything south of the equator, is actually larger, more populous than anything north of the equator. And when we embrace the fact that we as members of a, I don't know, Black and brown group of people, that sometimes I run out of words to explain who we are because I don't like underserved or underrepresented, but that's besides the point. But when we think of ourselves as part of a global diaspora, part of a global community of Black and brown people, and we start understanding that our innovation and our global competitiveness sometimes perpetuates this behavior of alienating users and imposing technology that sometimes obliterates culture and human behaviors that have sustained peoples for, you know, generations. I think that we have a moral duty and a civic duty to be the voice, not because we represent people in the village of wherever, that's not where I'm going, but because it's the right thing to do, because it's how I want to be treated. And so I want to live by that golden rule of doing for others as you want them to do for you. And we have an opportunity When you're an entrepreneur, when you're creating new products, you have an opportunity to empower others and to give people the power to define their own condition and to co-create their future. When you are solving problems, you are in essence creating what the future should look like through technology and innovation, right? And so you are changing the status quo, even if it's a small thing, like a kid being able to study because they have a solar lamp. You've changed that life simply by providing the kind of technology that made sense for that kid in India who didn't have access to the electrical grid, right? So when we are solving problems, we are helping people. Technology does not exist in a vacuum, and it doesn't exist outside of the human experience. Any invention you can think of has been about and for humans. When we forget that, and when we get caught up in the widget, the gadget, the money that we're going to make when we sell it, right? When we do all of that, we actually forget the impact. And impact is what ultimately drives sales. When you're doing something that people want and that is good for them, they will consume your solution. That wealth sharing is almost like a thank you for making my life better, right? Here is an exchange of energy. You do that thing and I give you money as a form of gratitude because of the value exchange that we're making right now. If you focus just on the money and you try to do very little for a lot, I mean, you'll succeed. That's the American way, but is that our way? Is that where we want to play? Is that who we want to be in the innovation economy as people of color in this country in a position of power, right? When we compare our community to the general diaspora, we are, if you have a roof over your head, if you have a job, and if you have drinking water, you are in the top 5% of the world. Okay, so think about that for a minute. Like, we tend to think of like super billionaires, you know, whatever. We are wealthy by all measures in a global context. And so what you do with that, you know, that's between you and your soul. But it's very important. It is the basis of human-centered design. And I think it's important for us as SHEP members and as innovation economy participants to really think about the power we have to create, innovate, and solve real important human problems. So that is empathy and definition. I don't want to spend too much time on ideation and prototyping and testing, just because that'll take us a little bit further. That requires a lot more time, is what I'm trying to say, than we can cover tonight. So I'll go very quickly, and then we can open again for discussion. So ideation is after you define the problem, that is when you start talking solution. You do not show up to the party with like, and here is my gadget. What do you think? No, 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 that is not the starting point. The starting point is, let me sit here with you, be with you, and experience this with you. Then we're going to sit together again and talk about, okay, how would we define this problem? And once we have language for that problem, then we start talking about, well, what would the solution look like? Okay, this is the process then of generating ideas. And you start with the bad ones. Like, I don't like this, I don't like that, I don't like the other thing. Sometimes you can put those bad ones together and make a great one, right? But when you know what you don't want, that's also important. So you put it all up there. Okay, this goes back to getting past your own great idea. That is not the starting point. You follow their lead. And that's when you start thinking about the whole journey. Because this is when they're going to say, like, I want it fast. I want it today. I want to have instant. Or they might say, you know what? I need to take my time to do this thing. I don't want to be rushed. I need to breathe. I need to walk a mile. I need to, you know, whatever. That the context and the environment is going to dictate what the experience of that user with the product should be. Then you want to go into prototyping. And the prototyping process should be fun, should be light, easy, and it should be in context as well. So what does that mean? If you are in Sweden, you want to use things that exist in Sweden. You don't want to have to import things from China into Sweden to do the thing. Granted, you can do that too, right? But back to human-centered design, you want to make sure that the product is sustainable. A lot of times, and I see this when we're working with, for example, Africa or Latin America, that we are building economies that are very dependent on foreign aid, in part because of the requirements for exportation. And so when these aid packages are constructed, they include, and you must use these companies, or you must use these types of products. And when you specify that into aid, what you're saying is, I'm giving you $15 million, but you have to spend them on American companies, right? And that's a whole other, ball of wax, and I'm not going to get into all of that. But if you have the opportunity to create a product that can be sourced locally or regionally, and eliminate the cost associated with import, then you are creating what Paul Polak, and you can look up his book. It's well, he has many books, but my favorite is The Business Solution to Poverty. He talks about radical affordability and the importance of making products that people can buy. And so part of prototyping is part of that feasibility and viability. At this point, you don't have to worry about materials, but you want to start thinking about materials. And the exercise of prototyping is to get something in front of that user as fast as possible. Ideally, they are helping, right? They're saying, well, I want it to move like this. I want it to look like that. I want it to be this size, etc. And you can do it with the cheapest things that you can get your hands on: PVC piping, paper, Lego stick, glue, whatever. And you can use existing technologies and tools so that you can build on something that already exists. You don't have to start from scratch every time. So then you get into testing. Okay, and at the testing step, we actually go back to empathy, because when they have that thing in front of them, you're going to sit once again and collect data. You're going to sit there and absorb how they are experiencing this new behavior, this new solution, how they're interacting with this new possibility. And the feedback is going to be like, oh, yay, okay, we're good to go, or we need to pivot. We need to iterate, we need to change direction, we need to make adjustments, okay? So testing is an opportunity for you to have your control group, and then out in the wild, right? You can have people using the gadget in a controlled environment where you can really isolate certain experiences, and you can see, is this user training? Do we need to create environments for people to adapt and adopt to new technology? But you also want to see it out in the wild. How are people using this thing out there? A lot of times, and you see it with pharmaceuticals too, like a drug is, they create it for Alzheimer's, and next thing you know, it's also helping people sleep, right? And so things happen out in the wild that are unpredictable, sometimes good, sometimes bad. So you need to allow for things to exist without controls, to see how people behave and what the consequences of that are. Another author that I love is Peter Senge, and one of his books, he's an MIT professor, but he talks about the learning organization, and this book is The Fifth Discipline. And back to engineers and people who know a lot of things and spend a lot of time learning, it is important for us to be humble, because our solutions today can be the problems of tomorrow. When we think of digital technology, cell phones, for example, a lot of the minerals that are required for the construction and manufacturing of these amazing gadgets that have made life so different are actually pollutants and are causing disease, and back to that diaspora in the global South. And so one solution, made leaps and I don't know, incredible advances in technology, but also in connectivity. And at the same time, it is a problem now, or has created other problems related to our environment, pollution, and people's health. So we have to go into problem solving knowing that we are fallible, that we cannot see the future, and that there are things that we won't know until, maybe it's too late. But that's why empathizing is always important. People have to feel empowered. They have to know that this is for them and it's about them, and you want that ownership, and you want to learn and adapt, right? We briefly talked about feasibility and viability. This is the time when you're looking at feasibility and viability. You're starting to think about what materials need to be used. How is this going to be made, and who is going to make it? Back to like skills, labor, the local context in which this product or gadget or service is going to be created, delivered, etc. And how is it going to be delivered? Is there transportation? Does it have to be drop shipped with a drone? Is there a road that you can drive to? Again, I'm thinking global here. In the US, well-structured problems, you have a lot of the solutions already in place. Wicked problems in other parts of the world that are just not as easily solvable. And then viability. What is the cost of making this? That's the cost of goods sold in your balance sheet, and not in your balance sheet, in your income statement. What is the price point that I have to set in order to have a good profit margin that allows me to operate? Are people willing to pay that price? And can I sell enough of this over time to make this a sustainable business model? Because you don't have just a product, you need to build a business around that product, right? There's a whole operation that would need to be put in place, and you have to sell enough to sustain that operation. So I'm going to leave you with this, which are tools that you can use. You guys can take a screenshot, you can, whatever you want to do. But basically this is empathy, design, ideate, prototype, and test. And here are various tools that you can use at different phases, right? At different steps in the process. This is an opportunity to practice empathy, designing, ideating, prototyping, etc., and without having to start from scratch, right? So this is kind of a tangible thing that you can take away. You can search, you can Google all of this, and just kind of go from there if you want to do more homework, or if you actually want to start trying some of this on your own. Some of the most revolutionary for me is just observation. Like, just sit there, shut up, and watch, right? We sometimes want to structure things so much and see ourselves kind of as at the center of the event, instead of doing the complete opposite of just being the bystander and allowing the environment to teach us something. Contextual inquiry is the other one that I love, which is sitting next to the person and watching them do the thing and asking them questions. Why do you do it that way? Does it hurt your hands when you press there? Do you get hot under the sun when you're sitting here doing the thing? How far do you have to walk? Do you walk this every day, right? So really exercising empathy and understanding from their perspective, right? And from your own, as you yourself are practicing that. So those two are my favorites. The others are pretty scientific things that you might have seen or done in your educational and professional careers. Okay, so I spoke forever. We have a little bit of time, and I want to open it up for people to ask questions and say things, react to what we have discussed here.
Just want to jump in and say thanks, Francesca. This is really helpful and renewing to see it all again and bring it back to the front of the brain.
Good. I am glad you're enjoying it. Well, I don't need to make people stay. I hope that this was useful, that it was informational, and that it gave you something tangible to act on as you move forward. Thank you again for having me. I look forward to our third session coming up soon.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And good night. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes,
Thank you, Francesca.
no problem, Jeremy.